next to them who snapped this photo of John Dowd, the president's personal lawyer, and Ty Cobb, another big-name D.C. attorney brought in to manage the response to the Russia probe. We are joined by that reporter who overheard the conversation and took the picture, Kenneth Vogel, Washington correspondent for the New York Times. Thank you for being here. A fascinating article. There's a lot to dive into here. So can you just set the scene for us? You're in this restaurant. They're speaking pretty loudly. You can hear them. And at some point, you snap a photo. Do they have any idea who you are or how loud they're being?
I mean, I can't imagine that they would have had any idea who I was, nor how loud they were being, although they were having this conversation, not just in this restaurant, but in the sidewalk seating area of this restaurant where passersby, other diners, whomever, servers could hear them talking about this incredibly sensitive subject. I was actually there meeting a source for lunch. I had my lunch with the source. We noticed these two guys who we instantly recognized. Cobb is obviously very easy to recognize with that trademark bushy handlebar mustache. And so, you know, I'm talking to my source, and my source gets up to leave. And I say, you know what, I'm just going to hang out here for a little bit. And as I sat there by myself at this table taking notes on my iPhone, they proceeded to discuss some of the, you know, the most sensitive of this sensitive area in a way that was very easily audible to me and allowed for us to get at some of these issues that we kind of suspected were already in play with the legal team. That is this question over to what extent to try to assert privilege and to potentially withhold documents that might be privileged from the special counsel Robert Mueller. You kind of know that this is going on, but to hear them talk about it puts flesh on the bones, as we like to say in journalism.
You know, so let's dive into the most significant parts of the conversation you heard. There's a few. I mean, this was Ty Cobb complaining about Don McGahn and how much Don McGahn, in his argument, does not want to give up. I mean, there was one mention even that McGahn might be, quote, hiding documents in a safe.
Yeah, he said documents in a safe, where we weren't sure specifically what he was referring to there, but it was in this broader context about document production. Don McGahn, from all the folks who we've discussed this with, is of the mindset that he has a duty to protect not just Trump, but the office of the presidency. And so he feels that if he is green-lighting document production that would potentially jeopardize Trump's ability, or the Trump White House's ability to assert privilege, it's not just going to affect this case and the Mueller investigation. It could potentially limit their ability to assert privilege in future cases, either if they come under investigation or there are other legal issues. And not only that, Poppy, but it could potentially influence or limit the ability of future presidents to assert privilege by setting a precedent that if a special counsel comes in and demands a bunch of documents from the president and the Oval Office and the executive office of the president ends up green-lighting all this stuff, then it's going to make it that much harder for future presidents to say, no, you can't have this. This is privileged information.
Ken, there is a nugget in your reporting buried a little bit that just struck me like a ton of bricks this morning. Big picture, you report that there is so much uncertainty about all of this tied to the Russia investigation inside of the West Wing that White House officials are now so fearful in their conversations, even with colleagues, that they think some of their colleagues may be wearing a wire for Mueller's investigation.
Yeah, I mean, that shows the extent of the distrust. So there's the sort of abstract academic legal issue of privilege, which I shouldn't say is abstract. Clearly, in this case, it matters, and it's being manifested in their real life deliberations. But that the deliberations have become so fraught that there is suspicion that people about really which sides people are on. Now, some of this, you remember, we had some of this earlier in the investigation where the Trump team brought in an outside lawyer by the name of Mark Kasowitz, and there was suspicion that he was leaking. There was subsequently a front-page Wall Street Journal story that one of the lawyers on the team, we don't know precisely which one, may have advocated for Jared Kushner to step down because there was concern that the competing imperatives about defending the president, defending Kushner, some of these senior staffers, even Don McGahn has his own lawyer representing him in this case. because there is concern about the exposure that these different people might have. And they're not necessarily, while they're all in the defense, so to speak, they're not necessarily all on the same page. That's fomented quite a bit of distrust and suspicion, as we articulate in our story.
Ken, before you go, you know, this is a restaurant a few blocks from the Times. It's in public, on the sidewalk, by the way, not even in a corner table in the back of the restaurant. These are two very highly compensated, highly trained, professional D.C. Power broker attorneys. What does this say about them?
I mean, it does. It's puzzling that they would be so indiscreet. And in fact, when we went to the White House and said, hey, we have this story and here are the sort of issues that we're curious about, here's how we know about them, and we let it be known, laid our cards on the table, we overheard this conversation. That precipitated a confrontation in which the White House Chief of Staff John Kelly and the White House counsel Don McGahn called out Ty Cobb and said, you can't treat this sensitive information so carelessly. So there's clearly concern about the way that this transpired.
And then we're out of time, but people need to read your report if they haven't yet to get the color of your conversation with Ty Cobb afterwards, trying to sort of clean things up, and was effusive in his praise for Don.